Fine, I just asked if you wanted to watch.
Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to the memorial service for John Runyon Moore. I am Lee Moore, his son, and I am joined with our families with Andrew Moore, his other son. Together we will be doing the presentation. We would like to have had this much earlier. It's been gone for more than a year now. But because of COVID-19, of course, we all know that it changes our plans. And I'm just happy that we're finally able to get together and remember him. Whether you are family, friend, colleague, or even golf buddy, welcome. I'd like to do a reading from Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
I am my father's younger son, Andrew, and right now I'm going to read some notes from my Uncle Hugh, who is my father's twin brother. He just celebrated his 92nd birthday a few days ago, and he lives in Indianapolis, Indiana. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but would like me to read his remarks. John and Hugh, twins, born 1929. John and I looked alike. We were alike and always stayed in close contact. In fact, it is hard to imagine a closer relationship outside of marriage. We took pride in being twins. It also attracted a lot of attention. We followed the same path through many things. We shared the same bed through high school. We attended Ohio State together. We joined the Naval Reserve together and spent our naval careers together, though on different ships, but in the same cruiser division. The big change came when John married Marjorie at the tender age of 23. I could not imagine me ever duplicating that feat. Probably the best decision I ever made outside of marrying Karen was going to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. That move was inspired by John. Earlier, I asked John what his plans were after he got out of the Navy. He said he planned to go to graduate school. It sounded like a good idea to me. I applied and was accepted at the University of Wisconsin. John initially went to Cornell, but transferred to the university. We stayed in constant touch by phone throughout our adult lives. We shared secrets that we knew were safe. I greatly miss him and our closeness. There is now an empty void. God bless him in his continued journey.
So I'd like to make some remarks of my life with Dad. I'll start out with professional history, because this is the university and many of you know him through the university. Then I'll move on to more personal remarks. This was written by him, by Dad, about himself as a short biography. And he writes it in the third person. So, John Moore, raised on an Ohio dairy farm, earned academic degrees in agriculture from the Ohio State University, Cornell University, and University of Wisconsin. He was a faculty member at Michigan State for 4 years, and then came to the University of Maryland in 1963, where he taught and researched in agricultural and resource economics for 35 years. He retired as professor emeritus in 1995. Some of you were there at the retirement party. During John, my father, his University of Maryland tenure, he spent 10 years as director of international programs in the College of Agricultural and Resource Economics. He also served as international agricultural development advisor in 13 countries over time. including 2 years in India under the auspices of the Ford Foundation. He's also the senior author of 3 books on agricultural marketing and has many journal articles to his credit. He was also chairman of the board for 2 nonprofits, the one here in College Park, the College Park Housing Authority, which runs Attic Towers, a senior citizens community, and also he was on the board and chairman of the board for the Trees of the Future, a nonprofit organization populating the world with more trees. My father and his twin brother, as we just heard, were born in September 30th, 1929, just 1 month before the stock market crash on Black Tuesday, October 29th. Perhaps this inspired an early interest in economics. I don't know, but on the other hand, perhaps not. He said of the Depression, he used to say many times, we were poor, but we didn't know it. It all seemed natural, because everyone else was like that they knew in those exceptional times. He often talked of farm life to us and his growing up with horses, and it was a farm that received electricity and telephone late. Tractors came like in high school and things like that. But I received from him an appreciation of the agrarian life, and for this, I am grateful. He also helped start me on my career, and the story goes like this. In the 1970s, university used to have a kind of open house. It was called at the time Community University Day, and it was held to better town-gown relations. I went to one of these with my dad, so I don't know if we were town or gown because we lived in College Park. I grew up in College Park itself. Went to PG County schools. So we went when I was about 9th grade, and during the event we saw a demonstration of a computer teletype connected to a mainframe in another building. The teletype was actually in the armory. The mainframe was in the computer center over on the edge of campus at the time. I knew very little about computers. I had this little plastic computer that I was given as a toy. I still have it, actually, the Digicomp 1. But I was fascinated by this more real computer, of which its expression was only this ASR 33 teletype, the sort of noisy thing that printed at 30 characters a second. Dad must have sensed my interest in this because he offered out of the blue to help me. He said, I can help you get started with that. And he bought me a manual and helped me get access. And so that led me down a path to computer science, which I made my career. I went to University of Maryland for computer science. And I went on to graduate school as well in computer science. When I came here to Maryland, I was already had plenty of experience. And so so that was really nice of him to get me started, and I'm grateful for that. In the 70s, our father hired us to work for him on projects, and just to give you an idea of the time, but also his way of thinking economically, he pitched it to us. He says, I'm going to pay you a penny every minute. So a penny a minute, that was what we're going to get. Well, of course, that was 60 cents an hour. Well, it doesn't seem like so much. But that, when you phrase it as a penny a minute, you think, wow, I get something every minute I work. Even though our father had been off the farm and working in town, the university, he still had the farmer in him. He loved to grow things, especially like he grew tomatoes and especially roses. He grew lots of generations of roses in our house. In the 70s, we moved in College Park from one part of the neighborhood to another part of the neighborhood. I think mainly, as my mother thinks anyway, explains, that he needed a bigger lot because the farmer needed land. Our dad, he liked military history. He had hundreds of books on the topic, of which we're now the owners, I guess. For many years, this was a great source or theme for gift ideas, and that's always a problem when you have someone who has hard to buy something, for your father when he already has everything he needs. So military history was a popular thing. Growing up, we visited many Civil War battlefield sites. As you probably know, there are no shortage of them here in the Mid-Atlantic region. We visited them all, I think, at some point. One kind of interesting thing is that in 1963, we went to see a reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg on the battlefield in Gettysburg. Just to contrast that, in the 150th anniversary, which was a few years ago, the battlefield was considered a park at sacred ground, and there was not going to be a reenactment there. They had it nearby in another place. And also interestingly, as I remember it, I think as my father remembers it too, it wasn't that popular to visit the battlefield for the reenactment in '63. I think Ken Burns has done a lot to promote the Civil War as an area of popular interest. I just remember lots of cannons shooting off and some people around, but not a huge thing. One of the great things Dad loved was golf, and it was a great source of exercise. I think it really helped him keep his health up in the 80s by going out around the golf course, golfing several times a week. This too was another source of gift ideas, so we appreciate that as well. I must admire, and as you probably will come to understand if you don't already know, how he loved to travel. He spent many summers overseas. During his life, he traveled to, at one time he counted 93 countries. He had a thirst to visit new places, and so he would pick out countries for contract work to be in places that he had not been to before. So, for example, I don't think people would naturally go to Malawi or Kyrgyzstan, but these are countries that he did consulting work at. Also, he liked to. We also spent some. He didn't always go by himself. Sometimes when he went to Europe, we went with him. So we spent summers in Spain and England. Domestically, we drove across the United States on a car trip. We did this twice in the 60s and once in the 70s. And the second time we did it, not only with the four of us, but also with two dogs. So it was, but we had these Ford LTDs at the time, and they were, like floating large rooms on wheels. So it was different back then. We also drove to Mexico City once, so from Washington D.C. to Mexico City and back, quite a trip. But he loved to plan them out, and he would have maps out for months and things like that, having it all arranged. I mentioned, 2 years in India. That was an amazing experience, and I'm grateful to Dad for that. One time we were headed from the plains of Bengal to Darjeeling, and the wheel just came off the taxi. And the taxi ground to a halt as the sun was setting in tiger country of Bengal. Our dad did a great job of trying to get us alternate transportation up to the mountains. We didn't arrive until quite late, but after dark. But just one of the challenges that he stood up to and conquered. It's a longer story. I could talk to it later if you want. In 1976, my father was going to take a sabbatical, and I was here in college at the University of Maryland at the time, and he wanted the whole family to go. That was one of our trips driving across the United States. Oh, the other part about, you're a son of or daughter of a faculty member. When your family trips consist of going from one college town to another college town across the country, because that's where all your friends from grad school are. They're at other colleges, just like you went to a college. And so I've come to naturally associate when I travel with college towns as well, because I know there's a certain kind of environment that will be there that I appreciate. So anyway, we're going to take a sabbatical, and he asked me what I thought. He was thinking about going to Berkeley or Stanford, and since he wanted me to come, I took a break from college for a semester and got a job through one of the faculty members here, who was a Stanford graduate, at Stanford. So Dad would say, okay, well, I'll go to Stanford. So it was a very exciting time to be in Silicon Valley. That year was the year Apple Computer was founded, for example. There was something in the air in Silicon Valley that was going on. You could just tell. The Homebrewed Computer Club was going. There were people met at Stanford at night just to talk about computers and building computers from microprocessors so that you could actually have a personal computer rather than using mainframes and things like that, which were the style up to that point. So it was a very exciting time to be there, and I am grateful to my father for this experience. It's been a wonderful time. And I miss you, Dad.
Every life a journey. My father's began on that dairy farm that my brother referred to just outside of Canal Winchester, Ohio, that had been in the family since 1799. My father had an older sister, Mariana, an older brother, Robert, a younger brother, Charles, and the twin, Hugh. Their parents, Lawrence and Hazel, neither raised on a farm, yet both well educated and choosing the agrarian life for themselves and their children. When I was a boy, my father liked to regale us. On Christmas morning, we had to milk the cows before opening presents. Slept on a screened-in porch in winter with no heat, brushed the snow off our blankets in the morning. Picked berries for just 2 cents a quart. The constant need to milk the cows kept everyone close to home. Only one photo exists of the family together on vacation. It's no wonder that my father once remarked about the fad in the 1970s of college students wearing bib overall jeans. I studied so hard so I could get off the farm and not wear those. That determination, often subtle in appearance, became for me his hallmark. And so when I, as a child, would say, "I can't do that, I can't do that," he would reply, "Can't died in the poorhouse." Or if I said, "I don't think this is going to work, I just don't see how it's going to work," he would reply, "Oh, ye have little faith. Oh, ye have little faith." And what did hard work, the times in which he lived, and the fortunate circumstances bring him? A life rich in family and career. He met my mother at Ohio State. He was a member of Alpha Gamma Rho, the agricultural fraternity, and she was a Delta Gamma. 2 years apart in school, their courtship spanned a year together in school, and then my father's 2-year hitch with the Navy as an ensign. They were married just days after my mother graduated from college. Ithaca, New York, Madison, Wisconsin, East Lansing, Michigan, all stops along their journey to College Park and the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. My father's doctoral thesis was on milk marketing based on data he collected traveling around Wisconsin, appropriately the dairy state. Little did he know that specializing in agricultural marketing would lead to work in over a dozen countries, and as my brother referred to, travel to many dozens more. And as my brother referred, we occasionally got to tag along. The first memorable, or the first overseas adventure was in 1967. We spent the summer in Spain. I remember even now vividly being in an airplane for the first time, taking off from BWI and watching the plane lift off and thinking it was just a miracle. And I have to say, even flying here last week, I still think it's a miracle every time the plane takes off. And of course lands, that's helpful. As my brother mentioned, we lived in Palo Alto for a semester in 1976, and for me that was kind of I didn't know it at the time, but it was a watershed moment because I sort of fell in love with California, eventually went back to California for graduate school, and then I stayed on, and I went to law school in California. And most importantly, I met my wife in California. So anyway, and live there to this day. So I don't know if we hadn't gone there for this just one semester, my senior semester of high school. I'm not sure, how my life would ended up, but I'm sure glad we did. So throughout their lives, my parents, certainly enjoyed the traveling, and they really delighted. Just it wasn't just the kind of physical wonders of the world, but also the man-made wonders. Of course, the cultures. And what's interesting is that when they were, I guess they've been married 2 years. So in the summer of 1955, they took a Liberty ship. Or I think it was actually called a Victory ship, which was just a more updated version of a Liberty ship. And they went on a student tour of Europe that summer. And they had to, even though they'd been married 2 years, they had to stay. They had single-sex dormitories, so they had to split up and stay in these dormitories for on the ship for I think it was about 10 days each way for the crossing, and the ship was known as the Grote Beer, which is Dutch for the Great Bear, and so we'd always hear about the Grote Beer, and so actually in the photo presentation you will see a picture of the Grote Beer. We thought that was only appropriate, but what's so interesting to me is my mother said when they went and when they came back that she was thinking this might be the only chance that she would ever get to go to Europe, and so little did they know that they would have many more opportunities, not just Europe, but crisscrossing all around the world. And it wasn't, of course, just foreign travel. I mean, my parents really enjoyed, both when my brother and I were growing up, but even afterwards, they enjoyed, long car trips, across America. They just loved kind of Americana and checking out all the interesting sites, man-made and otherwise. And of course, as my brother alluded to, they had a number of friends, and family too, just all across the U.S. So it was it was kind of their thing, and I think it just definitely helped to define their interests throughout their lives. Like a lot of sons who mimic their father, I read the Washington Post because he did, I think. I certainly remember reading it as early as 8 or 9, but it was probably the sports and the funnies. I also watched a lot of the CBS News with Walter Cronkite with my dad. I always enjoyed that. I always felt that somehow I was connecting with America. I'm not sure it was, but and then we also share, because we're both somewhat night owls. We often watched Johnny Carson's monologue together, and felt some sort of communal experience, not just the two of us, but all the night owls out there in America watching Johnny Carson. My father was also a gamer to try new things. For instance, at the age of 72, at Lake Placid, New York, they take the bobsled runs and they put wheels on the bottom of the bobsleds. And so he agreed to get in the bobsled with other family members, and we went shooting down the bobsled run with a professional driver, of course. But pulling a G or two in the corners and everything. Yes, he definitely was up to try things like that. One of the most memorable experiences I had with my father along that line was at the age of 14. My age of 14, he agreed to ride with me in a what was called a double century bicycle ride. And this was in the early 70s when bicycling wasn't as popular a fad. And but there was a ride that was called the Tour of the Scioto River Valley, and it was 105 miles on Saturday from Columbus, Ohio. You left from the State House and rode down the Scioto River to Portsmouth, Ohio, and then the next day you rode 105 miles back to Columbus. And anyway, he agreed to do that, but for weeks beforehand, we had to take progressively longer rides to kind of get in shape, and so we would go out riding around the back roads of the Beltsville Agricultural Experiment Station to build our endurance. But my recollection was the farthest we ever went before we got in the car to go to Ohio to do this ride was 40 miles. So there was some question whether we were going to be fit enough to do this. But anyway, we were able to finish the collectively 210-mile mission. And although we were a bit sore in the saddle, we were very satisfied at having had that accomplishment. And looking back, I just see it was a wonderful way to share the Ohio landscape that my father loved with him. I would also say, actually, my mother and my brother came, but they were support. They actually drove from Columbus down to Portsmouth. We all stayed in a hotel in Portsmouth, and then they met us back. So it was a family affair in that way. Despite being an academic and an administrator, my father was also a regular guy who enjoyed a round of golf with family and friends, or just a stranger he happened to be paired with. My father and I played a lot of golf, mostly at the University of Maryland, and also in later years at Pate Branch, just down the road. But we also played over the years in a total of 8 states together, highlighted probably by a round of golf we had at Pebble Beach on the Monterey Peninsula in 2005. And my memory is that there's the signature hole. It's a short par 3, but it has a beautiful view. It drops down and the ocean is beyond you. Anyway, we both parred that hole. So that was really kind of a special moment. We struggled on the back 9, but we did definitely share that moment. My father, like many golf addicts, reveled in the glorious satisfaction of a ball well struck. He would take mulligans when offered, but he also thought that winter rules, which for those of you who are not golfers, that means that you usually in winter, when the ground is perhaps under repair, you can improve your lie slightly by just moving the ball a foot or 2 to the side so that you can perhaps strike it a little better. But my father sometimes he enjoyed winter rules, and he would sometimes extend them into spring, not too often in summer, but then again when the leaves and twigs came in the fall, the winter rules were back. So that was always kind of an amusing little back and forth we'd have, because for whatever reason I didn't like winter rules and he did, and so that prevailed for decades. Our 2 views on that subject. Later in life, my father endured health challenges that required a regimen of infusions, often lasting for hours. He went to these appointments without complaint, and he tolerated them well. He got his part of the job done. In the final week of his life, maybe slightly disoriented as time and place, the final thing he said to me at 6 p.m. when the sun was still up, he said that he needed to get to sleep because there was work to be done in the morning. My memory of my father is that he was ever the doer who got things done, because Kant died in the poorhouse, and he had much faith. My father was not a deeply religious man, although he had many years of perfect attendance at Sunday school growing up. I think he believed in the afterworld, although he was perhaps uncertain as to its form. I'd like to think he is still playing golf, still striking balls, somewhere out in the cosmos. Winter rules, of course.
I've usually found a celebration of life to be a bit forced, at least when it comes so soon after the passing of a loved one. The weight of grief is at its heaviest, and mourning the loss of life seems better suited for the moment than celebrating a life lived. I don't think many people would have wished for John's memorial service to occur this long after his passing, but I think the unusual circumstances have presented us a gift, a chance for time to help carry some of the sadness of his loss and allow us to truly celebrate the wonderful life that John Moore lived. I know there will be some tears today, but how nice that they can be tears of sadness and of joy. I'm happy that we can be together in person to celebrate today. The stories, memories, and photos we share help paint the whole picture of who John was, the remarkable life he lived, and the lasting effect he had on all of us. I am grateful to have had this opportunity with my parents over the past year, and I look forward to doing so with the rest of you. So with that, I will hand this off to my brother, who will share a story close to his heart as well as to mine.
I have many fond memories with Papa, and most have one thing in common: his endless energy and inability to sit still. Papa was always looking for the next thing to do each day. You only have to sit down once with Papa, flipping through photos on the projector of his travels to Egypt, Kenya, and elsewhere to understand his overwhelming passion for travel and adventure. In fact, besides at meals or at the computer editing photos, I don't recall many times seeing him sit down. This is a trait he definitely passed down to me, albeit usually at the frustration of my friends and family. That being said, I can't thank you enough for it, Papa. My earliest memory experiencing Papa's quest for adventure occurred on a family trip to Yellowstone. I was young, so my faint memories barely include the Cody Rodeo, fishing around bison, and one particular wildlife sighting. It was either a bison or a moose, but we saw this large herbivore feeding quite close to us. After several minutes of watching, the beast slowly fed around a hillside and out of sight. While my parents and others considered the sighting over, I definitely wanted to follow and see more. Whether Papa noticed my eagerness or wanted to get closer himself, I don't know. Actually, probably it's both. He encouraged we hike closer. I think I recall my dad very reasonably saying no, but excited Papa proceeded to lead my brother and I over the hill to see the animal again. Likely way too close to a creature that's well over 1,000 pounds and can run 35 miles an hour. I actually don't recall much more of the sighting, but I'll always remember Papa's enthusiasm to continue and push closer. What's funny is, little did we know, a little over a decade later, I would be daily working in that same park, regularly telling people to not do exactly that. But thank you, Papa. Thanks for the excessive energy you've passed on to me. It has led me to endless adventures in such a fulfilling life, just like yours.
Good afternoon. I've been asked to say a few words about John, whom I've known for many years. And it all began in 1963. I was appointed to the faculty at the University of Maryland in the Mechanical Engineering Department. And so my wife Pat and I decided, it looks like we may be here for a while, and indeed it has been like 58 years or so. As it turns out, we moved in the fall of '63, and who moves in next door to us but the Moores? So this was a wonderful group of people that we had the good fortune of meeting John and Marge, and the boys Lee and Andrew. We had a good time of learning about each other, and as already mentioned, John took his family to India a few years after we had all settled into our houses, and he came up to me to say that he's going to make this trip. He'll be gone for about a year. And he was going to rent his house. He says, in fact, it is rented. And I said, well, who are my new neighbors, perhaps? And he says, well, some young lads from the Goddard Space Flight Center. I said, young lads, I wonder what that's going to lead to. Well, in any event, they did have their parties, these young fellas, and they invited Pat and me to a party one evening. I can't tell you any of the details except for one thing I clearly remember. As we were walking around in the house and all the party is going on, I come to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, on the kitchen floor, there's a big keg of beer, which you would expect, I guess, at a youngster's party. And it was a mess. There was people slopping beer all over the place. And I said to myself, if John and Marge could see this, they'd have a fit. So they came back from their trip. The house was still standing. As I understood, things were okay on the inside. So it worked out just fine. A few years later, John introduced me to the College Park Rotary Club. He had become a member in 1972, and when he approached me a couple of years later, I said, well, this is a bad time for me to do something like that because I've just been appointed chairman of my department, and I'm going to need a little time to understand my responsibilities. So a few years later, I had time, and so I did join Rotary. I mentioned that because this brought me much closer to John, because as Rotarians, we are expected to attend weekly meetings. These are dinner meetings where we would have usually a very good speaker. We had a lot of members in the club who had good connections, and that helped us out greatly. So I got to know John much better. I would see him almost every week, chat about how things are going on, so forth and so on. And I noticed a couple of things about John. I noticed that he clearly must be very well read, and he would ask our speakers from time to time, not every speaker, but he would ask them questions perhaps about things he didn't quite understand. He did it in a very nice, gentlemanly way. And I thought he was persistent, but also clearly very knowledgeable and well-read. The other point I would make is he was a good storyteller, a good about things he would like to entertain people with. And I remember one evening a person at our table was complaining about how hard it was growing up as a child. And when he was finished, John says, well, wait a minute, I want to tell you something. I grew up in Ohio on a dairy farm, and my twin brother and I had responsibilities, and one was to milk the cows every morning before we went to school. Well, he said, I want you to know it was so difficult getting to do that job. And also, we were doing this under very severe weather conditions. It seemed to be so cold, so early in the morning. I didn't ask him, is it that cold in June, July, and August? But I thought about that. In any event, a couple little stories I have to tell you. John, as already mentioned, was an avid golfer. And one afternoon, I was out there with a few people playing golf on the 9-hole golf course right next to the University of Maryland 18-hole golf course. And I don't know whether it's the 4th or 5th hole, but we all teed off and started walking down the fairway. And as we're walking down, I see down, one way down the end, this fellow walking around, carrying his head down, and I'm wondering who he is. And well, as I got closer, I realized, my goodness, that's John Moore. What in the world is he doing walking around here at this time? Well, he explained to me, I asked him, are you all right, John? That was my first reaction, whether he's kind of confused. So, no, he says, I'm fine. He says, I played this golf course this morning, and I lost my golf ball on this hole. I didn't have time to search it out because there were people behind us waiting to play. So I came back this afternoon looking for it. John showed a lot of determination. I never did ask him if he found that golf course, by the way, golf club ball. John was known to be a very good volunteer. He worked very well in Rotary, especially in the early years, where he would volunteer for projects that the club was pursuing. And he ultimately moved up to be president of the club. That's a one-year appointment where you would elect new officers once a year and keep turning things over. I want to say something about his presence at Rotary while I'm on the subject. Many years later, of course, he wasn't well, as we all know. And he would come to the meetings, and at the time he was seeing doctors and going to hospitals, etc. And people would ask him, well, John, how are you doing? And he was very patient with people, answering these questions. And the one thing I want to get across to you is that he never complained. He always told the story and then move on. Let's get going with the meeting. He also served on the advisory board of Attic Towers. Attic Towers is a building here in College Park, a high-rise building put up for indigent people who can't afford things, they're up in years, they're not in good health. And so John really enjoyed doing that. In fact, I asked him just 6 months ago or so, John, are you still working with Attic Towers and that advisory board? He said yes, and I was startled because I think he started about 30 or 35 years ago, and he just stayed and stayed. He enjoyed the work. My wife Pat talked to John when she had a chance to see if he might be interested in becoming a member of the Board of Visitors. She was a Board of Visitors for the School of Music, and he said yes. He thought he would like to do that. He was accepted as a member of the board, and he would tell me from time to time how much he really enjoyed it. He especially seemed to like classical music. I want to now turn the attention briefly to his wife, Marge. You've already heard what kind of person she was. She was also a docent at the Riverdale's mansion, which is down the road a few miles. Upon her death, my wife Pat talked to me about how it would be nice if we could make some donation for something that would be able to remember Marge. So she went to Riverdale Mansion people there, the powers that be, and said perhaps we might have some kind of an artifact, let's say, in her memory and display it for people to see. So they agreed to that. And Pat quickly handed the check over to make sure they didn't forget what they were going to be doing. So she made the first donation. And it was very successful. The final display is a silver tea collection, which is shown with, I guess, her pictures there, and in memory of Marge Moore. John was always so happy that this took place. He really admired, clearly, he admired Marge very much and loved her. And he just couldn't get over the fact that this was done for her, and he's very proud of her. John frequently also talked to me about his sons who were growing up, what they were doing in high school and college and beyond into their professional careers. And John was not only a wonderful husband, but a very dedicated father. As for me, I can only say I was very fortunate to have John as a good friend for close to 60 years. I miss him dearly.
Strawberry Melody.
I first met John Moore in 1973. I was a first-year graduate student in agricultural economics here at the University of Maryland. And John offered me a research assistantship, something I didn't even know existed at the time. That was the start of what is now almost a 50-year career in research for me. John was successively my boss. He was my advisor, and ultimately he was my colleague at Maryland, and for a while I was actually his boss as chair of my department. But of all those things, most importantly, John was my friend and a mentor. It was John who convinced me to leave the University of Maryland and to go to the University of California to pursue my PhD. It was John who called me in 1978 when I was an assistant professor at his alma mater, the Ohio State University, and he convinced me to apply for an open assistant professor here at the University of Maryland. Once I came to Maryland, John supported me as a junior faculty member, as a more senior faculty member, and ultimately as a chair of the department. I met John when I was a very young man. I'm an old man now. John made a very, very big difference in my life, as I'm sure he's made in many of yours. And that's the way I always remember John, as a very good person who made a really big difference in people's lives. Thank you.
I'd like to mention that that piece was one that my father requested for his memorial service. It was one he enjoyed, and so he had asked that it be performed, as you've just heard. Next, we're going to show a 10-minute slideshow or presentation called Retrospective in Pictures. Photography was a very popular hobby in the Moore family. When the Moore family gathers, there are often many cameras, and everyone has to have the shot of the family on their camera. So it's like a lot of cycling through of cameras and things like that. My grandfather, my father's father, was a photographer as well, and my father kept his camera, a Graflex medium format camera, on his desk for many, many years. The pictures you're about to see, I assume we're still on the main slide, were mainly gathered from emails. My father loved to send emails of pictures from scans from albums and things like that to out to the family. I'd like to note that a couple of the pictures are pictures that Dad took that don't necessarily have any people in them. They're like scenic or whatever. And so we thought that they were nice pictures, and we thought we'd include them to show some of his non-family pictures. There's also a picture of the Groottebeer, which we heard about earlier. So you'll see it go by, and so enjoy. So I'd like to thank you all. My brother and I would both like to thank you all for coming today for the memorial service for our father, grandfather, friend, and colleague. Please enjoy the following piece if you can stay, and then afterwards join us at the University of Maryland Golf Club for a reception.